立法會主席。
The President.
Good
morning. This is the first council sitting of 2019. I wish every member a good new year, and I hope government officials can answer the questions. Question 1, Mr. James To. President, the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China pointed out in a report delivered at the 19th CPC National Congress that well-ordered steps must be taken to advance democracy in Hong Kong SAR. Besides, Articles 45 and 68 of the Basic Law stipulate that the ultimate aim of selecting the chief executive and electing all the members of the Legislative Council by universal suffrage or dual universal suffrage shall be achieved in light of the actual situation in Hong Kong SAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. In December 2013, which was 33 months away from the general election for the 6th LegCo, the government launched public consultation on the methods for selecting CE in 2017 and for forming LegCo in 2016. Given that the general election for the 7th LegCo is now only 20 months away, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it will consider afresh launching expeditiously public consultation on the methods for selecting CE in 2022 and for forming LegCo in 2020, as well as commencing the 5-step process? If so, whether it has assessed if there is sufficient time for the relevant work to be taken. If it will not, whether it has assessed if this will run counter to the spirit of the above-mentioned remarks and to the ultimate aim of dual universal suffrage being achieved in Hong Kong SAR as stipulated in the Basic Law. And 2, whether the CEE, during her duty visit to Beijing on the 17th of last month, discussed with leaders of the central authorities issues relating to constitutional reform of Hong Kong SAR. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. President. Article 45 of the Basic Law stipulates that the method for selecting the chief executive of the Hong Kong SAR shall be specified in light of the actual situation in the Hong Kong SAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress, and that the ultimate aim is the selection of the CE by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. Article 68 of the Basic Law stipulates that the method for forming the LegCo shall be specified in light of the actual situation in the HKSAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress, and that the ultimate aim is the election of all members of LegCo by universal suffrage. According to the interpretation by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of Article 7 of Annex 1 and Article 3 of Annex 2 to the Basic Law of Hong Kong SAR, adopted by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress on the 6th of April 2004. A 5-step process must be followed if there is a need to amend the methods prescribed in the annexes to the Basic Law for selecting the CE and forming the LegCo. The 5 steps are: the CE to make a report to NPCSC on whether any amendment is necessary, the NPCSC to make a determination on whether to make any amendment based on Articles 45 and 68 of the Basic Law in light of the actual situation in HKSAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress, the amendment to be passed by a 2/3 majority of all LegCo members, the CE to grant his or her consent, and a report to be made to the NPCSC for approval or for the record. Since the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR, the methods for selecting the CE and for forming the LegCo have been developing towards the ultimate aim of universal suffrage in a gradual and orderly manner and in light of the actual situation of HKSAR stipulated in the Basic Law. The method for selecting the CE has evolved from the nomination and election by a selection committee with 400 members for the first-term CE to the present election committee of 1,200 members. As for LegCo, the number of members has been increased from 60 for the first-term LegCo to 70 today, and the number of seats returned from direct geographical constituencies election has been increased from 20 in 1998 to 35 now. Moreover, the 5 new functional constituency seats created in 2012 return members through election on the basis of one person, one vote by some 3.2 million registered voters who previously did not have a vote in the traditional FC. My reply to the question raised by Mr. To is as follows. Universal suffrage of one person, one vote for selecting CE and electing all LegCo members is enshrined as an ultimate aim in the Basic Law. With this aim in mind, the SAR government of the previous term conducted 2 rounds of extensive and systematic public consultations spanning 7 months in total before putting forward a universal suffrage package for selecting the CE, which is constitutionally in order, lawful, reasonable, and rational, and on the 2nd of June 2015 moved that LegCo a motion to amend Annex 1 to the Basic Law concerning the method for selecting the CE. Unfortunately, the motion was voted down in LegCo on the 18th of June 2015 as it did not obtain support from a 2/3 majority of all members. According to the decision of the MPCSC relating to the selection of the CE of Hong Kong SAR by universal suffrage and on the method for forming LegCo of HKSAR in the year 2016, adopted by the MPCSC on the 31st of August 2014, if the specific method for selecting the CE is not adopted in accordance with legal procedures, the method used for selecting the CE for the preceding term shall apply. The method used for selecting the 4th term CE in 2012 continued to apply to the selection of the 5th term in 2017, which means that the CE continued to be elected by a 1,200 member election committee. According to Clause 2 of the interpretation, the methods for selecting the CE and forming the LegCo may be amended or remain unamended. For any amendment to be implemented in the methods for selecting the CE and forming the LegCo, tripartite consensus among LegCo, the CE, and MPCSC is required. The government fully understands the aspirations of the community for universal suffrage. Regrettably, universal suffrage of one person, one vote was unable to be secured despite 20 months of effort by the previous term government. Rashly citing discussions on political reform will lead to social conflicts or even lead to some people resorting to extreme action affecting the development of Hong Kong. Rather than acting rashly, it is imperative for the SAR government to prudently consider all related factors, size of the situation, seek consensus, and work towards a favorable atmosphere. On the method for forming LegCo, it's also stipulated in the decision that after the election of the CE by universal suffrage, the election of more LegCo members may be implemented by universal suffrage. At an appropriate time, prior to the election of LegCo by universal suffrage, the CE elected by universal suffrage shall submit a report to the MPCSC in accordance with the relevant provisions of basic law and the interpretation on amending the method for forming the LegCo. A determination shall be made by the MPCSC. In other words, we shall fully implement the selection of CE by universal suffrage before the CE is elected by universal suffrage, and the SAR government can take forward the method for electing all LegCo members by universal suffrage. Number 2, the details of the discussion between the CE and leaders of the central authorities during her duty visit are normally not disclosed. Mr. James TO. The government and CE have been talking about forging a consensus and creating a favorable atmosphere. So by creating a favorable atmosphere and forging a consensus, it should be the obligation of the CE and the government. If our current CE fails to achieve that, would she be held accountable, and can we consider it a failure? For the past chief executives, with the exception of Mr. Tung Chee-hwa, he did not complete his term. There was controversy every time we discussed universal suffrage, and a 2/3 majority was not always secured, but the past chief executives would do their best. So has the Carrie Lam administration accepted defeat? If that's the case, should she be held accountable to our society? Thank you very much for the question. In terms of creating a favorable atmosphere, we must realize that for any constitutional reform on the method for electing CE and tripartite consensus would be required from the MPCSC, CE, and LegCo. So it is very important to strike a consensus. The views of our community are important, but at the end, we have to see whether a tripartite consensus can be formed by all 3 parties. In terms of the executive, legislature, and central authorities, they are also crucial. We have done a lot in improving the relations between the executive and legislature headed by the chief executive. We have enhanced communication with LegCo, and on political issues, we have maintained communication on different political issues. In terms of communication between LegCo and the CPG, it is also crucial to facilitate political reform. But apparently, communication has yet to be ironed out. If we are not confident that political reform can be successful, we should not begin work rashly. Electing the CE by universal suffrage is one of the goals under the Basic Law. So the government efforts are not just about public consultations. Work is ongoing. If we are able to forge a consensus and if we are confident, we would certainly move ahead. Mr. Wuchiwai. Thank you, President. The Secretary said without confidence or a hope of reaching a consensus, discussions on political reform would not be restarted. And as we know, the method for electing the CE is confined by the 31st of August NPCSC framework. If this is to change, we must either amend the August 31st framework or forge a new consensus from our community on constitutional reform. Would the SAR government and chief executive only restart discussions on constitutional reform under the 31st August framework, or is there any chance that the NPCSC decision can achieve a breakthrough, and is there any chance to achieve a consensus? And is there any way we can step out of the current conundrum of Hong Kong? Thank you very much. Mr. Wu mentioned the 31st August 2014 by the NPCSC. When we talk about constitutional reform, we cannot just focus on the 31st August decision. There are a few fundamental issues to tackle. First of all, we must first understand the constitutional order behind the issue. The Central People's Government has the right of decision, so we must obtain their consent as well as two-thirds majority support at LegCo. The 31st August decision was made by the NPCSC. There was a legal basis and effect to the decision. So in the previous constitutional reform proposal, both the CPG and SAR government agreed with the proposal, but regrettably, we failed to secure two-thirds majority support at LegCo. So such decision was legally sound. And it is also important to have a common legal basis before we restart discussions. As for the actual constitutional reform proposal, there are divergent views, and in order to come up with a solitary proposal or consensus, efforts from all sides are required. We see that certain LegCo members have deep concerns towards the CPG or their government officials, and as such, without a basis of consensus, further efforts would be very difficult. So once we achieve a basis or a specific proposal, we can restart talks on constitutional reform. And we feel that the best solution now is to focus on livelihood issues. The Secretary did not explain whether the 31st August decision would form the basis of striking a consensus. As I explained, the 31st August decision was made by the NPCSC, and it carries a legal effect, and it forms a common legal basis on any discussions on constitutional reform. Dr. N. Chang. President, I have a question for the Secretary. As you know, for the UK Brexit arrangement after the referendum, Brexit was approved, and on referendum day, immediately a number of members of the public regretted that decision, and they wish they had voted stay. So at the end, more people would prefer stay than exit. So for the question raised by Mr. James To, I guess that he believes the 31st August decision was a sound one. So would the government carry out further consultation and discuss with the pan-democrats or the opposition camp if the 31st August decision was adopted on the 1st of June as a method for selecting the CE, if there is majority support from them, are you going to ask the CE to talk to the CPG on whether such arrangement can be implemented? She was speculating on my motive, so can I clarify it? Well, she was acting like a stand-up comedian. Dr. N. Chang, were you speculating on his motive? I believe that he hopes constitutional reform can be implemented as soon as possible. So per the 31st August decision, does he hope that it will be implemented? I am against the 31st August decision. There's no need to clarify yourself. Secretary, I'd like to thank Dr. Chang for her question. All along on constitutional reform and other aspects of my work, I have maintained communication with LegCo members, and we have maintained communication with people of different political backgrounds. So we have never given up hope on achieving the ultimate aim of universal suffrage. But the success of constitutional reform require support from CE and the CPG, as well as two-thirds majority of LegCo. So the views from the community on any proposal is important because it would somewhat affect the stance of LegCo members. Even if the majority of the public prefers one approach, we would still need to see whether we can obtain two-thirds majority support at LegCo. If we see such prospect, discussions on reform would be restarted, and we find this the best solution. Mr. Alvin YEUNG, I hope the Secretary can tell the Hong Kong people clearly if a favorable environment is to be created, would the 31st August decision be an insurmountable and unshakable basis? The previous term government had attempted to implement the proposal, but they did not succeed. The NPCSC also made a 31st August decision based on their power, and it formed a legal basis. If we are to restart constitutional reform or further promote its development, this is a starting point. if we cannot even reach a consensus on this fundamental legal basis, I don't see how we are in a position to further our reform proposal. In a gist, the NPCSC made a decision on the method of selecting the chief executive on the 31st of August 2014, and I hope it would form a common legal basis in order to achieve constitutional reform. Mr. Ted Hui. Thank you, President. When we want to fight for universal suffrage, you said this would stir up conflicts in our community, and Carrie Lam agreed. If that's the case, there would not be universal suffrage. So are we going to tell the world that there will be no democracy in Hong Kong? When you said you want to create a favorable environment to promote constitutional reform, what have you done? Have you made arrests and jailed the dissidents, made prosecutions? So how can you convince the public that you are trying to achieve universal suffrage? Secretary, thank you very much. In terms of restarting constitutional reform, even without public consultation, it was not the same as not restarting the process. We made an attempt in the previous term. We did not succeed. If we are to restart the reform, we must see a likelihood of it succeeding. So we would not rashly proceed to public consultation and restart discussions, because that would stir up further conflicts in our society. We need consent from the CE, CPG, and 2/3 majority of LegCo, so we must enhance communication as well as our understanding on constitutional order. And for controversial issues, can we form a basis of communication with the CPG and LegCo? And on contentious issues, can we strike some form of consensus? We can see that under the leadership of the CE, we have enhanced some relations between the legislative and executive. This is clear for all to see. So a lot of work is underway, and the goal is to build a basis to facilitate further work. At LegCo, the executive would communicate with different LegCo members, and you can see how we tackled different issues in the past, and this would be the basis for forming a consensus. If we do not communicate at all with the CPG and the officials, do you expect that we can strike a consensus on such a contentious issue? So we should be pragmatic as a responsible government. The current term government has worked very hard on economic and livelihood issues, and this was mentioned in the 19th CPC National Congress report. And one of the key is to offer opportunities for Hong Kong. So we would opt for the most pragmatic and viable option. I hope Mr. Ted Hui can understand that.
Question number 2, Mr. Chung Kwok-pan. Thank you, President. The Kai Tak Cruise Terminal, built at a cost of over $8.2 billion by the government, has been in operation for over 5 years since its commissioning in 2013. It has been reported that as the terminal received no cruise ship calls for about 2/3 of the days of last year, coupled with the fact that the public transport plying the terminal is inconvenient, and the terminal lacks facilities to attract visits by tourists and members of the public. The terminal has often been left deserted like a ghost town. In this connection, with the government informed this council, 1, of the number of ship calls at the terminal, the cruise passenger throughput, and its percentage in the total number of visitors to Hong Kong, the per capita spending in Hong Kong, the daily average visitor flow of the terminal, as well as the percentage of the commercial floor areas leased out and the rental income in each of the past 5 years. Whether it urged the terminal operator last year to conduct more promotional activity to boost the visitor flow of the terminal, of the criteria adopted for assessing the performance of the operator and the circumstances under which authorities will remove and replace the operator, and 3, whether it will review afresh the modes of operation and management of the terminal and hold more events and activities such as conventions and exhibitions at the terminal so as to boost its visitor flow. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. President. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Felix Cheung, for his question. The government has all along been committed to develop Hong Kong into a regional cruise hub. During developing cruise tourism, not only enriches our tourism portfolios in attracting a different mix of visitors, its related economic activities also bring benefits to tourism, hotel, retail, transport, and food and beverage industries in Hong Kong. In 2018, the government formulated a set of comprehensive strategies and directions for cruise tourism development to drive the balanced, healthy, and sustainable development of cruise tourism in Hong Kong. Since its commissioning in mid-2013, the Kai Tak Cruise Terminal has been an important infrastructure in promoting cruise tourism in Hong Kong. Currently, the terminal has ship calls on almost half of the days each year. The overall utilization of the terminal by cruises has exceeded the then projected performance. Therefore, it is not factual to say that the terminal is vacant for most of the time. With the continuous efforts of relevant government departments, the transport connectivity of the terminal has greatly improved compared with the early days of its commissioning. At present, apart from daily services provided by franchised buses, green minibuses, and ferry operator, the terminal operator and some cruise lines would also arrange additional shuttle buses and feeder ferry services to ease cruise passengers' flow. At the same time, the government is carrying out various projects to improve transport infrastructure in the vicinity to make the terminal more accessible. My reply to the various parts of the question is as follows. 1. The number of ship calls at the terminal went up from 28 in 2014, its full year of commissioning, to 180 in 2017. While passenger throughput increased from 130,608 in 2014 to 184,073 in 2017, both recorded a surge of over 500%. At present, the terminal has accounted for over 80% of the number of ship calls and cruise passenger throughput in Hong Kong as a whole. Back in the earlier years when the government was considering the construction of the terminal, it was projected that the number of ship calls and cruise passenger throughput in Hong Kong as a whole would range from 181 to 258 and from 564,102 to 1.041031 million, respectively, by 2023. With the joint efforts of the government and the trade, the number of ship calls and cruise passenger throughput at the terminal in 2017 have both achieved the then projected performance by 2023. As for the leasing condition at the terminal, all 7 shops in the ancillary commercial area with a total area of about 5,600 square meters were leased. The rent of the shops is commercially agreed between the terminal operator and individual shop owners, and it is not appropriate for the government to disclose such commercial information. It is worth noting that in addition to the fixed rent, the terminal operator is also required to pay a variable rent at a designated percentage based on rentals and other income. The terminal is an infrastructure dedicated for cruise berthing and cruise passengers embarking and disembarking. As cruise passengers include local residents, it is inappropriate to make a direct comparison between the cruise passenger throughput and the total number of visitors to Hong Kong. The government also has no record of the daily average passenger flow of the terminal. Other detailed figures in relation to cruise tourism industry in Hong Kong and the terminal in the past 5 years are summarized at the annex. Parts 2 and 3. The terminal is a purpose-built infrastructure for berthing of cruise ships and handling large number of cruise passengers at the same time. The ancillary commercial area is also mainly for supporting cruise operation. Currently, the cruise operation and ancillary commercial area of the terminal are operated on commercial principles by a terminal operator through open tender. The terminal operator is required to comply with various requirements as set out in the tenancy agreement. For example, promoting cruise tourism, ensuring the terminal's smooth operation, engaging regularly with the trade, and reporting regularly to the relevant terminal management committee comprising a representative from Tourism Commission and government departments. The government has been overseeing the performance of the terminal operator through various means such as meetings and site inspections, and has from time to time requested the terminal operator to make improvements in various aspects to ensure an orderly and effective operation in the terminal. Despite the positioning of the terminal as to receive cruise ships and handle passengers, the government, in order to better utilize the existing facilities, has been working closely with the terminal operator and other parties to attract more people flow and add vibrancy to the terminal. Without affecting cruise service, the terminal operator will lease out the terminal to hold various large-scale private or public events. For example, sport activities, product launches, media functions, carnivals, car shows, etc. In the past 5 years, there were about 230 days, including the time for setup, removal, and reinstatement, with various events held at the terminal, attracting from hundreds to over 50,000 participants. In the last year alone, the terminal was leased to hold a total of 10 non-cruise ship events. The terminal operator will continue to liaise closely with event organizers and actively put in resources to participate in trade fairs, including overseas large-scale trade exhibitions, to promote the terminal as an event venue and widen its usage. Looking ahead, the government will continue to strengthen the transport connectivity in the vicinity of the terminal and support different organizations to make use of the terminal for holding events. As various developments adjacent to the terminal, including hotels, office buildings, Skytech Sports Park, etc., will be completed progressively in the coming years, the terminal and the adjacent area will form a commercial and entertainment cluster, the synergy of which will greatly uplift the people flow and vibrancy there. Thank you, President. Mr. Felix Chung. Thank you, President. In the government's reply, it is said that in 2017 alone, we have already achieved the 2023 targets. We have already exceeded the targets. But in actual fact, we all know, we have the impression that the terminal has not been put to the best use. Now, you talk about 186 days. Does it mean that there are 2 or 3 cruise ships are berthed on the same day during the peak season? So for close to half of the time of the year, the terminal is not to put to use. So that's a waste of resources. The Secretary said in his reply that there are 10 events organized in last year. Now we have 365 days, and then we take away the number of days where there are ship calls. There are only 10 events. Isn't that a waste of resources? I urge the government to ask the operator to do a better job. Let's not waste the $8.6 billion of investment into the terminal. Secretary, thank you. Mr. Chung, for your suggestion. I agree that in relation to the its original purpose, receiving cruise passengers, the terminal can be put to other uses when there are no ship calls. I know that the Council is very concerned about this. In the past, together with the trade and the legislators, we are working on that front. We will definitely do more. The terminal's main objective is to receive cruise ships. Now, in just a short period of 5.5 years, we can achieve a 50% utilization rate, taking reference from other similar projects. This is already a satisfactory figure. In other jurisdictions, the experience is that the terminal will not be put to 100% use on the first day of commissioning. Now, in 2017, there are close to 190 ship calls, and in many days, both berthing spaces have been used up. We still have room for expansion as far as utilization is concerned. Can we put the terminal to other uses when ships are not calling? We will continue to do that work. We will continue to promote the terminal as a venue for other uses. We will continue to work on that front. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, President, I believe that the Secretary has misunderstood. The Liberal Party has been supporting the terminal. Now, the question is, how many ships are calling the terminal? Now, I think cruise tourism is booming. People like to have cruise trips all the time, and during my holidays, I take cruises. But worldwide, the cruise terminals are not having good business, and we are concerned that since we've spent so much on this facility, there are so many shops set up there. Well, the business is not good. For my sector and Mr. Peter Show's sector, they've been crying out for help. So the government just don't leave it up to an operator to do the job. Maybe you can set up certain indicators, and if they don't reach these set indicators, there should be penalty meted out on them. That doesn't have to do with the number of ship calls. Now, what matters most is that we have built in this big project. Let's not waste the resources. How can we promote the project among local people so that they can use the facility more? So, Secretary, can you exert some pressure on the operator? Maybe when you do the next tendering exercise, try to do something. Try to ask them to come up with ways to better manage the place, or else they will be asked to give refund the government or what. Secretary, I think I'm seeing eye to eye with Mr. Tommy CHEUNG. Now, the terminal, I think it has performed satisfactorily. And it also goes to show that Hong Kong can attract more people through this facility. Now, as to whether that for this 5,600 commercial space within the terminal can better use be made of that. Now, all the 7 shop spaces have been leased out, except for one shop space which is involved in the litigation, and the operator is now in a legal case with that shop owner. Now, apart from that, all the other spaces have been leased out. Now, after the legal dispute has been settled, and if there is retendering, I think we can do more. Now, apart from the commercial area, there are other areas which can be used for other activities when ships are not calling. And I have listed out such activities. We've done that in the past. I agree with Mr. Chang's suggestion. We will continue to monitor the operator's performance, and through doing more promotion work and through certain exhibitors, we will see how we can fully utilize the facility. We will follow up. Mr. Jimmy Ng. When I visited the terminal, the embarkation and embarkation process was very smooth. But then the area doesn't have a good footfall. Can the government consider implementing certain measures? Maybe you should issue license to cross-border helicopter operators to operate helicopter services. For example, do it on the rooftop, do it somewhere near the terminal, so that the cross-border high-value visitors can fly through a helicopter from Greater Bay Area to Hong Kong, and then they can board cruise ships. And after the trip, then they can take the helicopter back to their homeland. So can the government consider this? Now, I've raised this years ago. How is the progress on that proposal? Thank you, Mr. Ng, for your proposal. I agree that for the Kai-tak area, the entire area, if there is just a single facility, it won't attract too many visitors. So we will try to enhance the transport connectivity, widen the roads, organize activities. Apart from that, you may have noticed that we are taking out tender on the land sites near the terminal, including a site which is earmarked for building a hotel. Now, the land site has been auctioned off. So in the next few years, we hope that for other facilities like the sports park and hotels which have been commissioned, the area will be able to attract more visitors. Regarding helicopters, I know that the THB is conducting a study on providing helicopter services in different parts of Hong Kong. As to whether this should be the right location, I will leave it up to the THB to consider. Now, overall, if an area can be the sites in the area are put to different uses, that will help enhance the utilization of the terminal. Mr. Ma Fung-kwok, thank you, President. In the government's reply, it emphasizes the increase in the number of figures. For example, the number of ship calls and also the passenger throughput, etc. But if you look at the actual utilization rate, I think it's far from satisfactory, or else we will not be seeing the rental dispute. So we should not think that it is free of problem. Since there are so many days where there are no ship calls, can the government consider implementing measures to encourage the operators to make available the facility for use by arts and cultural sector? That way, we can increase the number of visitors and also enhance the business efficiency of the operator. Can that be done? Secretary, Mr. Ma has suggested that we should organize non-cruise activities. I said that we are already doing that. In 2017, there are 10 such activities. In the past 6 months, there are such activities too. And those activities include also sports and performance events. Some organizations have applied for a marathon to be organized there, and there are also exhibitions. So I think we agree on the similar direction. We can use the pier and also the park. We will continue our efforts. The number of such activities has increased in the past few years, and we hope that more exhibitions can be held there too. And we would also like to have arts and cultural activities there too. Mr. Jonathan Ho, thank you, President. I think the major problem with the terminal is transport. The terminal is segregated from the adjacent areas. Now, for D2 road, that will be built. Apart from that, are there any other measures to improve the transport situation? Now, the bus service will stop at 10:04 p.m. and the green minibus taking people to the terminal will be filled to capacity after the Children's Hospital has been commissioned. So we have been following up on the issue raised by Mr. Jonathan Ho. In my main reply, in terms of GMB ferry services and franchised bus services, there will be improvement. Mr. Ho also referred to certain bus routes. There are views that the operating hours should be enhanced. We will talk to the Transport Department on that. In the first quarter of this year, we will also take out tendering to introduce a ferry tourism service. We hope that the new ferry service will connect the terminal with Kowloon and the Hong Kong Island. Apart from serving as a transport means, it can also be some sort of tourist trip. Now, transport demand will go up, and I believe that we should be doing more.
Question 3, Mr. Gary FAN. In view of the extensive damage caused by Super Typhoon Mangkhut during its onslaught in Hong Kong in September last year, and the fact that the nuclear power stations in Daya Bay, Taishan, Yangjiang, and Lufeng of the Guangdong province are, at the farthest, only 220 kilometers away from Hong Kong, quite a number of members of the public are concerned about the threats posed to Hong Kong by nuclear incidents occurring at these nuclear power stations caused by natural disasters. In this connection, will the government inform this council? 1. Whether it knows the maximum sustained winds and the maximum gusts recorded at each of the nuclear power stations, as well as the heights of the maximum storm surge and the maximum sea level recorded in the nearby waters during the onslaught of Mangkhut, the designed maximum wind pressure that each of the stations can withstand. 2. Whether the government's work on guarding against Mangkhut included seeking information from the Guangdong authorities about the pre-typhoon preparatory measures and emergency response plans put in place for the nuclear power stations in the province, and whether it received after Mangkhut any reports from the Guangdong authorities on how such nuclear power stations had been affected by the typhoon, including if any safety incident had occurred, if so, of details, if not, the reasons for that. And 3. Whether it will provide in the contingency plan for natural disaster that where a major natural disaster such as typhoon, earthquake or tsunami, which may cause damage to these nuclear power stations has occurred, the government must expeditiously seek information from the Guangdong authorities on how the nuclear power stations have been affected and make public the information so obtained, if so, of details, if not, reasons for that. Secretary for Security. President, the construction and operation of nuclear power stations on the mainland are governed by national regulations for civilian nuclear facilities, which are formulated with reference to relevant international standards. When considering the siting of a nuclear installation, all previous tropical cyclones which took place within 300 to 400 kilometers of a site will be analyzed for the purpose of deducing the most damaging paths that may be taken by the most severe storms and typhoons, and correspondingly adopt in the plan's design a sufficient flood protection margin. Impacts of extreme incidents such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and air crashes will also be given due consideration. For example, compared to normal construction projects, substantially larger amounts of steel bars are used in the construction of nuclear power stations to achieve very high level of structural strength, which enables the plants to withstand super typhoons, air crashes, and other scenarios to ensure that the safety of the stations will not be jeopardized. Besides, the designs of the breakwaters of nuclear power stations have taken into account the design base flood level, maximum typhoon surge, and wave overtopping discharge corresponding to the wind speed. In addition, operators of nuclear power plants on the mainland are required under relevant laws and regulations to formulate their own contingency plans for natural disasters, prescribing response actions in a planned and structured manner to ensure the safety of the power plants. The Daya Bay nuclear power station, comprising the Guangdong Nuclear Power Station and the Lingao Nuclear Power Station, is relatively closer to the Hong Kong SAR at about 50 kilometers northwest of the city's urban area. Regular cooperation and communication channels are in place between the Hong Kong SAR government and the Guangdong authorities for periodic review of issues such as nuclear incident monitoring and notification arrangements. This is to ensure that in case of a nuclear incident, relevant information can be obtained promptly for implementation of corresponding measures. In this regard, as early as mid-90s, the Hong Kong SARG and Guangdong authorities established an official contingency notification channel with specific time requirements, including notification within 2 days for non-emergency events and immediate notification for serious off-site emergencies in the Daya Bay Nuclear Power Station. Over the years, the notification mechanism for incidents at Daya Bay Nuclear Power Stations has been working effectively. Furthermore, the government has put in place a comprehensive Daya Bay Contingency Plan, DBCP, which sets out appropriate contingency measures to be adopted immediately by government departments for protection of public health and safety in the event of a release of radioactive materials at any power station. It also stipulates that the provision of accurate, timely, and appropriate information and advice to the public via the media, internet, and other communication channels is essential to stem panic arising from a radiological release or even rumors, and to advise members of the public what to do and what not to do. As for other nuclear power stations in Guangdong, the one closest is about 130 kilometers from our urban area, and the rest are even further away. The general assessment made on the basis of international standards is that the threat to Hong Kong posed by nuclear power stations outside Daya Bay is small, hence the risk to which we're exposed is very low. Nevertheless, in view of the nuclear development in Guangdong in recent years, the Hong Kong SARG and the Nuclear Emergency Committee Office of the Guangdong Province Committee Office have drawn up notification mechanisms for nuclear power stations in the province so as to ensure that the Hong Kong SARG receives sufficient information to respond. The Daya Bay, the committee office formulated by the Hong Kong SARG is applicable to all power stations beyond Daya Bay that are in operation. My reply to the questions raised by Mr. Fan is as follows. 1. Based on information available, Super Typhoon Mangkhut weakened into a severe typhoon on the morning of the 16th of September and made landfall in the coastal areas of Taishan at around 5 p.m. that day. According to the information from the mainland, when Mangkhut arrived in Guangdong, the DBNPS, that is the Daya Bay Nuclear Power Station, was the most impacted among the nuclear power stations in the province, with the maximum wind speed reaching 41.75 meters per second or about 150 kilometers per hour. Based on information published by the mainland marine authorities before and after the landfall, maximum heights of the storm surge recorded by monitoring points near the various nuclear power stations range from 1 to 3 meters. The maximum height of the storm surge caused by Mangkhut was much lower than the plant's design basis. Say, for example, the DPNPS is situated at about 6.5 to 7 meters above sea level, and the height of its breakwater is some 13.8 to 14 meters. So the storm surge posed no impact on the safety of the stations, and despite serious damage caused to many places because of its strong wind and storm surge, Mangkhut did not affect the safety of the nuclear power stations in Guangdong. 2. Before and after the onslaught of Mangkhut in Guangdong, the Hong Kong SARG maintained close liaison with relevant authorities and nuclear power enterprises in respect of the typhoon protection contingency arrangements, so as to understand their safety condition. According to our understanding, to tackle the attack of Mangkhut, the Committee Office advanced its typhoon protection contingency preparations a few days ahead of its arrival, including the inspection and implementation of nuclear contingency plans and stocking up of emergency supplies, test run and protection of nuclear emergency command system, requesting power plants to strengthen their backup power and circuit protection, further enhancement of information exchange and operational liaison among fellow nuclear emergency response units, say for example meteorology, power supply and communication and nuclear power plant stations. All nuclear power stations also carried out inspections of various typhoon protection preparations and measures, as well as communication, logistics, and protection of emergency supplies in anticipation of the typhoon. The committee office also notified the Hong Kong SAR of its activation of contingency procedures for emergencies. Mainland authorities and the China Nuclear Power Group disseminated to the public information about the typhoon protection preparations, measures, and safety conditions of the four nuclear power stations before and after landfall of the typhoon through media, the television, radio, broadcast, newspapers, webpage, WeChat, Weibo, etc. During the typhoon, the Department of Ecology and Environment of Guangdong Province strengthened the protection of emergency radiation monitoring to ensure effective capture of information on the ambient gamma dose rate and meteorology data throughout the period. The Guangdong Power Grid Company closely monitored the safety of its nuclear power grid to ensure that electricity transmission paths stayed intact during the typhoon. All the power stations also conduct 24-hour monitoring of the movement of the typhoon and the effectiveness of the measures. After the passage of the typhoon, the 11 nuclear generating units remain in safe condition. 3. Hong Kong SARG attaches importance to the safety of nuclear power stations across the border. The operation of various nuclear power stations mentioned in the question are strictly governed by relevant legislations of the mainland. The DPCP and the notification mechanism set out above are applicable to safety incidents at the DBNPS and other power stations, including those caused by natural disasters. In the case of the attack of Mankut, the Hong Kong SARG had, in accordance with established mechanism, contact the authorities to obtain the information on the contingency arrangements. Therefore, there is no need to make a separate provision in the contingency plan for natural disasters. We continue to maintain communication with the authorities under existing mechanism in respect of contingency issues so as to ensure that the government could implement appropriate measures and disseminate information. Mr. Fan, I think the government has not specifically answered my question. In the third part of the answer, they said that they have taken the initiative to liaise with Guangdong authorities. However, in the second paragraph of the reply, they said that the Guangdong authorities have notified the Hong Kong SARG. So is it the case that, before Mankut there was a notification, but what about afterwards? On which date did the Guangdong authorities disseminate the information, or was it the case that the Hong Kong SARG took the initiative to ask for information? So on which date, when information was disseminated in relation to the safety conditions of the 4 nuclear power stations? Thank you. Under existing notification mechanism, there are 2 scenarios. First, in relation to incidents, there is one notification mechanism, and I've already set out the details in the main reply. If it is non-emergency events, then notification will have to be made within 2 days. If it is an emergency, then it will be elevated to immediate notification. There are also some preparation work. We're all very concerned about these preparations. On this occasion, with Typhoon Mankut, the Guangdong Province, as well as the Hong Kong SARG, have started communication well in advance. In our regular dialogue, we have talked about this. When Mankut was affecting Guangdong province coastal areas, we have already been in communication with Guangdong authorities, and that was an additional work because it was a special circumstance. That's why I have answered in my reply that additional measures have been taken. Before Mankut came to Hong Kong and Guangdong, a lot of work and sufficient preparation have already been put in place. Of course, in relation to nuclear incidents, of course, we have to be informed immediately, and there are also monitoring mechanisms. However, when it comes to management of mainland nuclear power stations, that is done in accordance with mainland regulations and laws, as well as their own authorities. Nuclear incidents and their preparation works will have to be related to us. If necessary, we would be able to make preparations as well as disseminate information to the general public. My question has not been answered. When was the notification done? And was it done by the Guangdong authorities, or was it an inquiry made by the Hong Kong SARG? Why did the Secretary try to circumvent this question? Well, actually, I have answered the question. I have not circumvented the question at all. I have said that in our regular dialogue, we talk on the phone a lot. Mr. Gary FAN, please sit down. You have already asked your supplementary question. At a very early stage, apart from official channels, we have also notified one another in an unofficial channel. So a few days ago, we have already been informed. Mr. Chan Kim-po, I would like to ask about the contingency measures adopted by the Hong Kong SARG. Well, the observatory said that it was not high tide on the day when Mangkut attacked. Well, if during a typhoon attack and if it coincides with high tide, what measures will be taken to protect life and property? Mr. Chan, this question is actually about nuclear power station safety, but I will allow that question anyway. Secretary, if as a result of the typhoon, the tide was sea level was affected as a result, of course, we are very concerned about that as well. And I can tell you that for the various nuclear power stations, in the selection of sites, construction, all international standards will have to be abide by. That includes those set by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So in the construction of a nuclear power station, breakwaters will have to be constructed, and the design will have to take into account what might happen. For the breakwater, Long Fang is 10 to 30 meters high. For Daya Bay, it's about 14 meters high. If we refer to the requirements set by the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, past meteorological data and possible height of waves and surges will have to be taken into account. In Typhoon Katrina in 2000, the storm surge was about 8 meters. Hato is 7 meters. Wendy is about 6 meters. And another one is about 3 meters. Well, as we could see that for Daya Bay is about 14 meters. For another nuclear power station, it's about 10 meters. So past meteorological data has been taken into account in the design of nuclear power stations to withstand possible strong waves brought by typhoons. Apart from that, for safety reasons, nuclear generating units are located at a higher level, for the Fukushima incident because these nuclear generating units were not put at a level high enough. They were damaged. For Daya Bay nuclear power station, they are 6 meters above sea level. For the Yangguang one, it's built on a hillside. The generating units are not at the foot of the hill. It was about 20 meters higher than that. So when it comes to siting and construction, there are very stringent requirements that comply with the IAEA standard. Ms. Eunice Ho. Ms. Eunice Yeung. Well, I would like to ask, it says that for non-emergency events, a notification will have to be done within 2 days. Is that sufficient time? Would that be done earlier than that? And it also says that the relevant operators will, through various media, disseminate information about safety condition, preparatory work, and contingency plans of the 4 nuclear power plants. So in relation to Hong Kong, how will Hong Kong people obtain the information? By reading the newspaper or what? Ms. Yeung, you have already asked 2 questions. Secretary. Thank you. Well, when it comes to the scale, there are 8 levels from 0 to 7. That is according to the event scale. For those that require notification within 2 days is 0 and 1. 0 is no safety significant. Level 1 is anomaly. So for 0 and 1, they are non-emergency events. For emergency events, there is a different set of requirements. The most serious involves alert. So it will have to be done around within a week. For the most serious event, it requires immediate notification. That is in line with the practice of a lot of countries. So for those that require 2 working days notification, they are levels 0 and 1. And for the Daya Bay nuclear power station, there has never been any radiation leakage event.
Question number 4, Mr. Tommy CHEUNG. It has been reported that with the successive commissioning of cross-boundary infrastructure facilities, and 1-hour living circle has basically been realized in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area. As a result, more and more mainlanders come to Hong Kong to seek medical treatment. Quite a number of doctors in the public hospitals have switched to work in the thriving private healthcare market, thereby aggravating the problem of shortage of doctors in the public hospitals. Consequently, the waiting time of new cases at various public specialist outpatient clinics has become longer and longer in recent years. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it knows the top 10 specialist departments in the public hospitals with the highest wastage rates of doctors last year and the respective wastage rates concerned. 2, whether it has projected afresh the respective manpower demands for doctors in the public and private healthcare sectors in the coming 5 years, having regard to the factors that more and more doctors have joined the private healthcare sector and that the number of mainlanders coming to Hong Kong to seek medical treatment has continued to increase. If so, of the respective specific figures, if not, whether it will expeditiously make such projections. And 3, of the long-term solutions to the problem of shortage of doctors in public hospitals, whether it will draw reference from the practice of Singapore and permit those doctors who graduated from medical schools of renowned universities outside the territory to practice in the territory without sitting for any exam, and whether it will provide incentives to encourage Hong Kong people who have completed medical training overseas to return to Hong Kong to work in public hospitals. If so, of the details, including the timetables, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Food and Health. Mr. President, my reply to the question raised by Mr. Tommy CHEUNG is as follows. 1. In 2017-18, the overall attrition rate of full-time doctors in public hospitals was 5.8%. The top 10 specialties in public hospitals with the highest attrition rates of full-time doctors were anesthesia, clinical oncology, family medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, ophthalmology, orthopedics and traumatology, pathology, psychiatry, and radiology. The respective attrition rates ranged from 5 to 10.6%. Details are set out at Annex 1. 2. The government published the report of Strategic Review on Healthcare Manpower Planning and Professional Development in mid-2017. For doctors' manpower, the projections have taken into account demographic changes and other relevant factors, including the known and planned services and developments, the requirements of public and private healthcare, social welfare and education sectors, as well as the demand for primary, secondary, and tertiary care services in Hong Kong. It is projected that there will be continuous manpower shortage of doctors in the medium to long term. The manpower gaps for doctors in 2020, 2025, and 2030 are set out at Annex 2. As an ongoing initiative to monitor the manpower of healthcare professionals, the government will conduct manpower planning and projections for healthcare professionals once every 3 years, in step with the triennial planning cycle of the UGC University Grants Committee. A new round of manpower projection exercise has already commenced, and the results are expected to be published in the first half of 2020. In conducting manpower planning, the Food and Health Bureau will, in collaboration with relevant policy bureaus and departments, assess the manpower situations of various healthcare professionals by taking into account all the known and planned services or developments as far as possible, such as the latest development of public and private hospitals, the development of Greater Bay Area and its implications, as well as the known and planned projects. 3. The following measures have been taken to increase doctors' manpower. A. The government has substantially increased UGC-funded medical training places over the past decade. The number of places was 470 in the 2016-17 academic year, representing an increase of 90% when compared with 250 in the 2005-06 academic year. In the 2019-20 to 2021-22 UGC triennium, the government will further increase the number of UGC-funded medical training places by 60 each year. We expect that increasing the number of medical training places will alleviate the manpower shortage of doctors in the medium to long term. Healthcare professionals in the public sector are of utmost importance. The Hospital Authority, HA, will recruit all qualified, locally trained medical graduates and provide them with relevant specialist training. There will be a total of over 2,000 medical graduates becoming registered doctors in the coming 5 years. Moreover, the HA will continue to proactively recruit doctors, retain existing healthcare professionals, and rehire retired doctors to address the manpower shortage of doctors in the public healthcare system. B. Upon commencement of the Medical Registration Amendment Ordinance 2018, the validity period and the renewal period of limited registration have been extended from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. It is expected that more eligible non-locally trained doctors, particularly those who are Hong Kong people, will be attracted to serve in the public sector in Hong Kong through limited registration, thus alleviating the manpower shortage problem. The HA and the Department of Health, DH, will continue to proactively recruit eligible non-locally trained doctors through the limited registration arrangement to provide clinical services in the public healthcare system. In 2019-20, about 20 applications for positions under limited registration submitted by non-locally trained doctors to the HA have preliminarily been assessed as eligible. To further encourage Hong Kong students studying medicine overseas to return to Hong Kong to practice, the Food and Health Bureau, Hospital Authority, and the Department of Health have collaborated with overseas economic and trade offices in conducting promotion activities to encourage qualified non-locally trained doctors to practice in Hong Kong. For example,
The Secretary for Food and Health went to the United Kingdom in May last year to meet with Hong Kong students studying medicine there and encourage them to return to Hong Kong to practice after graduation. Their responses were positive. The seminar was held in Hong Kong in August last year by Hong Kong students studying medicine in the UK, at which the Secretary for Food and Health and representatives from the Hospital Authority and the Department of Health were invited to speak on the opportunities for overseas medical students to practice in Hong Kong. The Chief Secretary for Administration and the HA Chairman visited the UK in September last year to promote the HA's recruitment scheme. The Secretary for Food and Health has also planned to visit Australia in the middle of this year to promote the scheme. C. To facilitate more non-locally trained medical graduates to practice in Hong Kong after passing the licensing examination (LE), the Medical Council of Hong Kong (MCHK) has, on the premise of upholding professional standards, enhanced the arrangements for the LE, including increasing the frequency of the LE to twice a year and introducing more flexible arrangements for relevant internship requirements since 2016. In addition, the MCHK officially launched the Virtual Education Resource Center in October 2018 to improve the transparency of the LE and refine the examination questions. D. For non-locally trained doctors who have passed the LE and worked in the HA for 3 years under limited registration, the MCHK is exploring if their internship requirement could be exempted. This is to provide more incentive for eligible non-locally trained doctors to serve in the public healthcare system in Hong Kong. The government will continue to take forward the recommendations of this report with a view to planning ahead for the long-term manpower demand. It will also take into account the effectiveness of extending the period of limited registration and response from the healthcare sector before deciding on the way forward. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, about the figures cited by London's Secretary, I really have a big question mark over them. Let's go to the back of the Secretary's reply. Towards the end, when he referred to licensing exam for non-locally trained medical graduates, they have been refined 5 times, but not many people understand that for medical students who have studied for 5 years, they need to take all the exam papers in one go. So for a medical graduate, how would any one of them be able to memorize what they learned in the first year when they have reached the 5th year? So, Undersecretary, I'm referring to your reply. You mentioned that the Medical Council of Hong Kong will relax the internship requirements of doctors. But you would also understand that for a doctor, it is impossible to set aside the specialty and go through internship before returning to his specialty. I mean, all these are thresholds barring non-locally trained medical graduates from practicing in Hong Kong. So I think you should be bolder by following the Singapore's example to attract non-locally trained medical graduates to practice in Hong Kong. Otherwise, elderly patients will not have the time to wait for the treatment they needed. Undersecretary. About non-locally trained medical graduates practicing in another jurisdiction, it is common to have a licensing exam. In fact, over the past few years, the Medical Council of Hong Kong have been implementing measures in terms of the planning of the LE and the number of exemptions allowed and the scope and compression of the contents of the internship program, with a view to attracting more locally or non-locally trained medical graduates to take the LE and practice in Hong Kong. As I mentioned just now, the Medical Council of Hong Kong is also exploring the option of exempting those who have passed the LE and have worked in the HA for 3 years under limited registration from internship requirement. This will provide an incentive for more eligible non-locally trained doctors to serve in Hong Kong's healthcare system. Your question hasn't been answered. I asked Undersecretary whether he would consider following Singapore's example to attract more overseas doctors. Anything to add, Undersecretary? Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Cheung. Regarding limited registration, we have extended the validity period to from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years last year. And we have received more applications than before, and we still need time to observe the situation to see whether under this improvement we indeed are able to attract more non-locally trained doctors to take the exam and practice in Hong Kong. And we need to gauge the result before deciding on our next step, Ms. Chan. Thank you, Mr. President. Referring to the government's figures, and I've also looked up information regarding the wastage rate of public doctors between 2008-09 to 2016-17, the wastage rate was 3.9% to 5.2%, and in fact, in 2017-18, the attrition rate reached record high. Together with two peak flu seasons, I would say that the public doctors are really frustrated and they are overwhelmed because of the numerous patients that they have to treat and the long waiting time. So apart from just sitting on our hands and waiting for these graduates of new medical training places to enter the public healthcare system, would the government consider some short-term measures, for example, offering one-off grant to public hospitals with tight manpower or serious manpower shortage and long waiting time, so that they have the funding available to attract more talents to serve the hospitals, so that the quality of service will not be affected and also the waiting time will not get longer. Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Ms. Chan, for your question. Regarding the life expectancy of Hong Kong people, it is getting longer with an increasing aging population and also high rate of chronically ill patients. We understand that all these pose pressure on our public healthcare system. Apart from the peak influenza seasons, there is already a great demand on our public healthcare system with high utilization rate. So in terms of manpower, we'd like to introduce different arrangements to improve the service level. In terms of manpower, apart from increasing UGC-funded medical training places, during peak seasons, we also introduce different measures to boost manpower. And the measures target not only doctors but also other healthcare professionals, nurses, and other allied health professionals. We also have different subsidy schemes to attract more doctors to serve in public hospitals. As far as the procedures are concerned, we also review the procedures so that nurses, pharmacists, and other allied health professionals can take part in the process of medical treatment. In terms of increasing the capacity, we have the 200 billion and 300 billion hospital development plans, and every year, apart from the additional beds in public hospitals, we also have some temporary beds available. And we also have a measure to retain doctors in the public healthcare system. And that is to say, we provide the training opportunities both locally and overseas. We also, on a regular basis, review the career promotion mechanism. Dr. Martin Liao. Mr. President, with demographic changes in Hong Kong and the aging of population, it is estimated that by 2030, according to the report, Hong Kong will be short of 1,500 doctors. And there has all along been an imbalance between public and private healthcare systems. We have 60% of doctors serving public healthcare system, serving 90% of patients in the public, whereas we have 40% of doctors in the private healthcare sector, serving only 10% of our population. Apart from increasing manpower, I'd like to know what measures can be put in place to address the imbalance between private and public healthcare sectors to better utilize the available healthcare resources. Undersecretary, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Dr. Liao, for the questions. We have a dual-track system, namely public and private healthcare systems. And in the past, we have introduced different measures to promote collaboration between the two sectors. However, there is a drawback. For example, after introducing a program, if the doctors in the private sector become more popular, this will cause a brain drain in the public sector. We also have other measures. For example, for simple medical checkups such as blood pressure and other procedures, they can be that could be collaboration with the private sector. And we believe that with the new voluntary healthcare insurance schemes coming on stream, some examination procedures are originally taken place in public sector can also take place in private sector with more choices offered to the public. Dr. Pierre Chen. We have very low morale. We have a serious brain drain without stoppage, and the situation is worsening. And if we only supply new doctors without retaining old experienced doctors, it's still a problem. You need to understand, Undersecretary, that the key of the problem is HA1 and HA2. Do you understand that, Undersecretary? And will the government review the mechanism to address the manpower shortage in the sector? Undersecretary, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Dr. Chen, for his questions. Regarding the pressure facing public healthcare professionals, we truly understand the situation, especially from the media reports. We learn how crowded hospitals were during the peak flu seasons, and we totally understand the plight of public healthcare professionals, and we're grateful for their help. Now, as for staff morale, this has to do with a number of reasons. Dr. Chen referred to the terms and conditions of employment of different professionals. We are aware of the situation. Because of different cycles, the HA had different remuneration packages for different employees. We are aware of the situation. In the long term, perhaps there is a need to review this mechanism to address the psychological impact on their staff because of the discrepancy in remuneration. Apart from remuneration and benefits, one important function of the HA is that it is a professional training ground. All local medical graduates would be given training opportunities both locally and overseas by the HA. And we need to step up our effort in promoting that to retain manpower in the public sector.
The fifth question seeking an oral reply. Honorable Alvin YEUNG.
President, it has been reported that some human rights organizations have alleged that the Chinese government has set up re-education camps in Xinjiang for detaining about 1 million people from the ethnic minorities, the majority of whom are ethnic Uyghurs believing in Islam. A number of ethnic Uyghurs alleged that their family members, relatives, and friends had lost contact with them after being taken away by public security officials for no reason. Also, some people who had been detained in such camps alleged that they had been psychologically abused and even tortured. However, the Chinese government has stated that the camps concerned are vocational skills training institutes established with the aim of eliminating extremism from the root and preventing the emergence of terrorism. On the other hand, there are reports that the Undersecretary for Security led a delegation to Xinjiang last month to exchange views with local officials on the work of preventing terrorist activities. Regarding the visits conducted outside Hong Kong in relation to the work on preventing terrorist activities, would the government inform this council, one, of the details of the aforesaid visit, including the time and location of each event on the itinerary, whether the delegation visited the re-education camps, if so, of the details. 2, of the names and post titles of the officials who proposed, arranged, and participated in the visit, and set out such information by whether they work under the government of Hong Kong SAR or mainland authorities. And 3, of the number of visits conducted outside Hong Kong by government officials in the past 5 years in relation to the work on preventing terrorist activities, as well as the destination and date of each visit. Secretary for Security. President, the Hong Kong SAR government attaches great importance to the combat and prevention of terrorist activities and has been assessing the threat level of Hong Kong being subject to terrorist attacks. Currently, the threat level is assessed to be moderate, indicating that there is a possibility of attack, but there is no specific intelligence suggesting that Hong Kong is a likely target. That said, as terrorist activities around the globe and their trend have been changing, and diversified modus operandi have evolved, the Hong Kong SAR government must stay on full alert to guard against any unexpected challenges. The Hong Kong SAR's counter-terrorism or CT strategy are four-pronged, that is, vigilant prevention, adequate preparation, prompt response, and speedy recovery. Under the strategy, law enforcement agencies or LEAs strive to prevent terrorist activities in Hong Kong under an intelligence-led approach and ensure preparedness at all times among response and emergency services, supporting personnel and other relevant parties via repeated drills and training. All departments have in place various contingency plans which are subject to continuous review and improvement for enhancing their capability to deal with any possible terrorist incidents. To further strengthen Hong Kong's CT capability and preparedness, the government set up the Interdepartmental Counter-Terrorism Unit or ICTU in April 2018, comprising members from 6 LEAs, namely the Hong Kong Police Force, Immigration Department, Customs and Excise Department, Correctional Services Department, Fire Services Department, and the Government Flying Service. The ICTU is tasked with monitoring the global terrorism trend and CT measures, reviewing and improving CT strategies in Hong Kong, developing specialized CT training, optimizing various contingency plans, etc. Serving as an interdepartmental CT platform on top of the original CT framework, the ICTU not only fosters closer liaison and smoother collaboration among relevant departments, but also synergizes CT intelligence, training, emergency response, education, and other related efforts, with a view to enhancing Hong Kong's overall CT deployment and preparedness. Instead of a local challenge of any single region, CT efforts hinge on cross-boundary and international collaboration. Therefore, the Hong Kong SAR government has been arranging people to visit other places from time to time to know about their practices and experience through in-depth exchange with the respective government authorities and officials. The observations from these visits serve as reference or lessons for the Hong Kong SAR government in formulating CT policies, such as strengthening various CT measures, enhancing capability and preparedness of officers concerned. The Honourable Alvin YEUNG has raised 3 questions about the visit to Xinjiang by a delegation led by the Undersecretary for Security in December 2018 for exchange with local authorities regarding efforts on preventing terrorist activities. My reply is as follows. Parts 1 and 2. A 9-member Hong Kong SARG delegation visited Xinjiang on the 6th to the 10th of December 2018 with the Undersecretary for Security as the leader and one Assistant Secretary for Security, and 7 ICTU representatives, including 1 senior superintendent and 1 senior inspector from the police, 1 senior pilot from Government Flying Service, 1 divisional officer from FSD, 1 principal officer from CSD, and 1 assistant superintendent from the CNED, and 1 chief immigration officer. The trip was the first visit of ICTU outside Hong Kong, with the aim of study, exchange, and understanding. Xinjiang was selected because a number of terrorist attacks took place there. But the situation was brought under control and it improved in recent years. The ICTU was of the view that Xinjiang's CT experience could be of reference to Hong Kong in formulating and optimizing our CT strategy and capability. During the study trip in Xinjiang, the ICTU visited a number of local CT units and police facilities. The CT Technical Training Center, security checkpoints at tourist attractions, border control points, public facilitation management centers, district police stations, and the police training school, and attended seminars and exchanged views with local officials. The itinerary did not include the vocational skills training institutes mentioned in the question. Part 3. From time to time, major LEAs on CT, including the police, in the government, maintain exchange with counterparts outside Hong Kong on prevention of terrorist activities and law enforcement, and enhance officers' knowledge and skills on the operational level via mutual visits. During every visit, departmental representatives will, apart from understanding the practices and experience of other places, introduce Hong Kong's latest development and work in various areas, with a view to expanding and enhancing liaison and cooperation between Hong Kong and other places in different fields. As the itinerary of each visit covers different subjects and content, we have not kept statistics on individual subjects and therefore do not have information as requested in Part 3 of the question. In addition to the mainland, some destinations of previous visits outside Hong Kong involving CT include the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, Germany, and Indonesia, etc. President, relevant departments have to make reference to the experience and latest development of other places in order to effectively support our discipline services in their multifaceted law enforcement on CT and different related aspects. For example, the police have in recent years vigorously strengthened training of frontline officers on immediate tactical intervention to ensure that those arriving earliest at the scene are capable of making swift responses to provide the public with immediate protection of their safety. The Immigration and CNED have been closely monitoring the latest intelligence in various places and have implemented immigration and import-export control under a professional and risk-based approach to intercept persons and cargoes suspected of being involved in terrorism activities, and the CSD has stepped up efforts of CT work in penal institutions having regard to experience in other places. Besides taking account of and in response to latest trends in terrorist attacks worldwide, the LEAs have been examining and procuring different suitable equipment such as the police's modular vehicle barrier and radiological detector, as well as the CNED's ion scanner and portable spectroscopic equipment, so as to upgrade their ability and equipment in preventing and detecting terrorist attacks. As always, the SAR government endeavors to maintain Hong Kong as one of the safest cities in the world. We will stay vigilant for proactive prevention and keep enhancing Hong Kong's CT capability and preparedness to ensure a long-term safe environment in our city. The ICTU will actively monitor measures adopted by other regions which are exposed to higher risks, while paying close attention and making reference to the latest advice or guidance and news released by different international organizations, with a view to continuously enhancing Hong Kong's CT capability. Thank you, President. Honorable Alvin YEUNG. President, I believe the Secretary has independent thinking and study visits should not just be to learn from other people's experience, but they should adopt reverse mentality. I'd like to ask whether in Xinjiang they have seen any CT measures which are against the protection of human rights, say, for example, in the police training centers, where the Hong Kong SAR must not learn from. Secretary. President. To answer Honorable Yeung, in simple terms, no. What we saw was aligned with human rights. However, I believe this question has been raised with colored glasses. Of course, I understand that you will understand why we do CT work, and we chose Xinjiang because, indeed, there were terrorist attacks causing injuries and fatalities in previous years. But then in the last 2 years, there had not been a terrorist attack, and there had been no fatalities or injuries. So we would like to take reference from that. And as I said in the main reply, we went to different places. We will not be selective in looking at places and listening to others. In our exchanges, we came to understand that it is important to understand the international anti-terrorist trends. And CT might spread from one place to another. Therefore, we must have a global view. We must not be selective in our exchanges. And because of this, we'll continue to visit different places in order to boost our CT capability. Mr. Wong Kwok-pan. President, a parrot will imitate others in making sounds, and some people would just be repeating others' views. And I'm saying that some people are repeating the comments of anti-China comments overseas, and these are moved to the Legislative Council of Hong Kong in order to attack and insult their own country. They have really very bad mentality. President, in recent years, it is said that 5 different toxins may merge together, and we are talking about Hong Kong independence activists, and they may gang up with Xinjiang, Mongolia, and other independence activists so that there will be damage done to society. I agree and support the Security Bureau in conducting exchanges in Xinjiang because that is necessary. In 2009, in Xinjiang, there was a major violent incident, and over 1,000 people were killed or injured. And in 2016, there was also this riot in Mong Kok, and there were blows done to our community. And there is an absolute need for us to have exchanges so we could counter such riots and terrorist attacks and work together. My question for the Secretary is, this time when you went to Xinjiang, and after you have come back with regard to the so-called merging or collusion between Hong Kong independence activists and separatist efforts outside Hong Kong, what kind of law and order risks are we facing? Do you have a new assessment as a result of the visit? Secretary, thank you, President. Whether we are talking about organizing terrorist activities, no matter what the motive is, we would always stand prepared to prevent and counter such terrorist attacks. After this study trip in Xinjiang, we deeply believe that these are the points to note. Number one, that we should come to full grasp of the trend of terrorist attacks. You know, this is important. We have had plane hijacks, and then we had human bombs, and now we have lone wolf attacks. And also, we see more radicalism in Hong Kong here. And therefore, it is important for us to come to grips with the trend of terrorist attacks. And this is important to my making of policies. Number two, we think tactics are important. We need to be able to be quick and effective and have fully funded immediate response. In the past 2 years, there has not been any terrorist attack in Xinjiang. And that goes to tell us that tactics training is important. Number three, equipment is important. As I said in my main reply, I reported to LegCo that different LEAs have been upgrading the procurement of different equipment. And then another point, public participation. In Xinjiang, there is emphasis laid on how the public should participate in anti-terrorist work in the form of intelligence reporting and also taking part in making immediate countermeasures. And this will help me make anti-terrorist policies. Mr. Junius Ho, President, I heard just now that the Secretary would exchange with the mainland to see how we should be equipped so as to enhance our CT capabilities. He said that the level of alert is medium or moderate in Hong Kong. I like to say that we should prepare for rainy days. It may be moderate today, but what if it climbs to a high level or a very critical level? Would our police officers be able to tackle the situation? If not, and in terms of the country's public security, well, do we have a legal basis to cooperate with the public security officials on the mainland? Say there is a group of terrorists in Hong Kong. How can we protect Hong Kong people? And if we need to cooperate with mainland authorities, can we have the legal basis, for example, to surrender criminals instead of allowing people to accuse us of repeating the Causeway Bay bookstore incident, saying that we did not have the legal power to do certain things? Secretary, thank you. President, Mr. Ho is asking us to make sure that we must have the ability to do it. I think that is a very reasonable request, and this is what I should do when I make policies. Certainly, we should prepare for rainy days. And we must be equipped to tackle any risks. And if there is actual intelligence telling us that there is an attack, we must be prepared to tackle it. And I'm confident that the departments in the SAR have the capability to tackle any terrorist attack. Why I say that? Because, number one, we conduct intelligence training and also exchange with other places. I was reporting to members that we would go to different places to have exchange with their CT units. Intelligence exchange has been very smooth, especially with regard to mutual support in intelligence gathering and also sharing intelligence analysis, particularly funding for terrorist efforts. Whether we are talking about the Interpol or whether we are talking about the World Customs Union, Hong Kong receives a lot of respect in terms of our foresight and preparedness and capabilities. Number two, in terms of the Hong Kong mechanism and manpower, Mr. Ho asked the question, and I can tell Mr. Ho that we have sufficient police power and capabilities. In the police, we have different specialist divisions. I said that we have the ICTU with 6 LEAs, which is on top of our existing CT mechanism. And actually, in the different LEAs, I like to tell you their work, so you have more knowledge and confidence in our work in this respect. Number one, we have the special duty unit in the police. They are tasked to counter terrorists, and we also have the airport special units, and we also have the emergency units. We also have finance investigation unit. We also have railway rapid response units, and also the JIFU. These are the units in the police force that are tasked to do CT. And with regard to the CSD and CNED, at the CNED, according to the World Customs Union's Global CT Strategy 2016, measures are such that they include the following aspects, and the customs exercise is looking into those, including cooperation at different levels, including enhancing the ability to tackle cross-boundary risks, and also to increase training, and also to increase coordination and support for members of the union. This is the strategy of the World Customs Union. And as for the CSD, what is the point of order? The Secretary is not answering Dr. Junior's Ho. I think he is filibustering. There are 3 other members waiting to ask supplementaries. Secretary, please be brief. According to the United Nations manual, the CSD is also taking actions. Therefore, different LEAs are doing their best to make sure that Hong Kong is fully prepared.
Last question seeking an oral reply, Mr. Holden CHOW. The government has stated that it has all along been striving to combat money laundering and terrorist financing activities in accordance with relevant international standards in order to maintain Hong Kong's status as an international financial center. In this connection, will the government inform this Council, 1, of the number of reports about suspicious transactions involving money laundering or terrorist financing activities received by the Joint Financial Intelligence Unit, and the number of such cases it referred to other units for investigation, as well as the respective numbers of relevant prosecutions and convictions in each of the past 5 years. 2, whether it has assessed the aggregate value of property relating to money laundering and terrorist financing activities carried out in Hong Kong, as well as the aggregate value of such property confiscated in each of the past 5 years of the measures put in place to ensure that all such property can be confiscated. And 3, given the diversified means for money laundering and terrorist financing, how the government will set up its training for the law enforcing officer to enhance the ability to combat such activities. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, as an international financial center with a highly externally oriented economy, Hong Kong is not immune from the threats of money laundering (ML) and terrorist financing (TF). We should stay vigilant against those threats. Hong Kong is committed to combating ML and TF together with the international community. Hong Kong has been a member of the Financial Action Task Force of FATF since 1991. Over years, we have put in place a robust anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism AML CFT regime having regard to international standards set up by the FATF. To stay ahead of the curve, we put the AML-CFT regime under continuous review to ensure that it can face up to challenges posed by the fast-changing financial markets and security landscapes. Over the past few years, the government has adopted various measures to strengthen the AML-CFT regime so as to ensure that our system is keeping with international standards. To identify and assess ML/TF threats facing Hong Kong, we have conducted a territory-wide risk assessment to examine the ML/TF threats and vulnerabilities confronting financial businesses, designated non-financial businesses and professionals, and the city as a whole.
The risk assessment report was published in April 2018 and will be updated from time to time. Informed by the risk assessment over the past year, we have taken forward various enhancement measures. These include updating the legal and regulatory framework, reinforcing the adoption of a risk-based approach in preventive and supervisory measures, stepping up efforts to restrain and confiscate crime proceeds, and strengthening international cooperation. In respect of updating the legal framework to mitigate the identified risks, the government implemented 4 new ordinances last year, including 1, the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Financial Institutions Amendment Ordinance 2018, 2, the Companies Amendment Ordinance 2018, 3, the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Amendment Ordinance 2018, and 4, the Cross-Boundary Movement of Physical Currency and Bearer Negotiable Instruments Ordinance. We will try to minimize the risk identified in these 4 new ordinances. On the questions raised by Mr. Holden CHOW, my response is as follows. 1. It is stipulated in the Organized and Serious Crime Ordinance, OSCO, and the Drug Trafficking Recovery of Process Ordinance, DTROP, and the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance that any person who knows or suspects that any property represents proceeds of an indictable offense or drug trafficking or is terrorist property must report his or her knowledge or suspicion to the Joint Financial Intelligence Unit, JFIU, as soon as it is reasonable or practicable. From 2013 to 2017, the JFIU received more than 280,000 suspicious transaction reports, or STRs. About 44,000 of them were referred to other law enforcement agencies or regulatory authorities for follow-up, whereas the remaining 238,000 STRs were archived due to the lack of sufficient grounds for further action. During the same period, 828 persons were prosecuted for ML offenses and 620 persons were convicted. 2. Under Section 14 of the OSCO, where proceedings have been instituted against the defendant of a specified offense, the prosecution can make an application to the court of first instance for restraint of the realizable property, assets and funds of the defendant so as to prohibit any persons from dealing with the property. Upon conviction, the court of first instance may assess the value of proceeds gained from relevant offenses by the defendant according to Section 9 of the OSCO and make a confiscation order against the defendant to recover the relevant monies pursuant to Section 8 of the ordinance. The DTROP have also similar provisions pertaining to drug trafficking offenses. From 2013 to 2017, proceeds confiscated under confiscation orders amounted to over $1.6 billion. LEAs will continue to strengthen ML and TF risk assessment so as to understand the latest typologies, step up investigation and prosecution of ML-TF activities through exchange of financial intelligence and anti-agency cooperation, and foster closer cooperation with overseas institutions with a view to combating ML syndicates and recovering proceeds dissipated from Hong Kong. 3. LEAs are committed to building up the investigative capability and related knowledge of investigators of all ranks, including officers of the JFIU, through regular training. LEAs also maintain close cooperation with each other and overseas enforcement agencies and financial institutions in an effort to jointly combat ML offenses. Apart from providing regular financial investigation training to investigators, ongoing basis LEAs also send officers to attend conferences convened by international organizations so as to enhance their understanding of the latest international security landscape and facilitate exchanges with overseas enforcement agencies on investigative experience and knowledge. Thank you. Ms. Holden CHOW. President, the reason I ask this question is because when I was in Washington, the U.S., to attend a meeting on ML and TF, I was told by an American expert that they had difficulties in trying to recover proceeds of TF and ML, and some of the supervisory measures are not in place. And according to a reply, the JFIU received over 280,000 STRs, and for 230,000 of them, there could not be further action because of lack of sufficient grounds. And according to a reply, $1.6 billion were confiscated during the period. Have they included proceeds from offenses involving ML and TF, and also encrypted currency? I'd like to know the estimated amount of proceeds that could not be confiscated so far or recovered so far. Secretary. Mr. Chow referred to the amount recovered. That $1.6 billion included all proceeds from related offenses. Mr. Chow referred to encrypted currency. We have no records of proceeds recovered from such offenses. But for encrypted currencies, in G10 meeting November 2018, the organization decided to enhance the transparency and regulation of this kind of transactions. At the meeting of G20, they expressed their concerns and risks and transparency of transactions involving encrypted currencies. Relevant organizations, including FATF and also the Monetary Stabilization Committee, and also the organization to monitor international affairs, have not set up any standards for the regulation or supervision of encrypted currency transactions. So we do have difficulties in tracing such offenses, but when international standards are in place, I hope we will be able to do better. Mr. Chen Kim-po, thank you. I'm also concerned about the number of STRs received by JIFU. Less than 20% or 44,000 of the STRs were referred for further follow-up. Does that mean that the quality of the STRs was questionable? Because you could only take follow-up action on 20% of them. Will you take action to enhance the quality of STRs? And can we require banks and relevant organizations in making STRs be more accurate, and reports should be made on need basis so that the quality of STRs can be enhanced? Secretary, I think it's worth pointing out that in 2017, JFIU received 92,000 odd STRs. In 2016, they received 76,580, up 23%. The rise in figures reflected that different industries are more aware of their reporting duties involving ML and TF offenses. And when it was first introduced in 2016, the rise in the number of STRs were steeper than that in 2015. In 2016, the number was 80% higher than that of 2015. When reporting STRs, these organizations are more cautious. Whenever they have a slight suspicion, they will still report the transaction to the JFIU. And because of that, IFTU have approached the FIs and also DNFBPs to enhance the quality of STRs so that they can be more sensitive to more suspicious transactions. So in the first 9 months of 2018, the number of STRs fell to 60,300 odd. As for the AUN ATMO, it was enacted in 2012. and the number of reports have risen since. We have to enhance our enforcement ability to secure conviction. The evidence available and information available is critical, and we've been discussing with LEAs and they should have more communication with FIs and DNFBPs to explain to them how such reports should be accompanied with more sufficient evidence so that we can have a stronger basis for taking follow-up action. The number of prosecutions is small, but that goes to show that our anti-money laundering regime is quite effective. We've been able to detect the commission of offenses, and we have also served a sufficient deterrent effect. In 2018 April, the risk report was announced, and the ranking in Hong Kong, or the risk assessment, is medium to low. That means we don't have very obvious ML and TF risks, and the request for assistance from other organizations is also limited in number. But according to the industry, most banks, when it comes to new accounts in their due diligence exercise, now they are very unreasonable to prospective customers. They ask for documents that cannot be available. For instance, when it comes to a new company, the bank may ask for a business track record and documents to show their past profitability. If banks are so stringent, this is going to stifle Hong Kong's ability to attract foreign investments and also new emerging enterprises to come to Hong Kong. The government encourages new startups in Hong Kong. These customers are just prospective ones. They don't even have an account. So even before an account has been set up, how can you suspect that the account will be used for ML or TF? The Hong Kong Mayor has also issued a notice saying that banks should not use exclusive risk avoidance approach by banks. I'd like to know whether we have evidence to show that the situation has improved. Secretary, for the retail banking industry, on average, every month, 10,000 new bank accounts have been set up, and 67% of them are SMEs or startups. About 2,000 of them are from overseas SMEs or startups. In these successful new account cases, over 50 to 60% of them were able to complete the procedures within 2 weeks, and some even within a few days. Regarding the actual time required, it depends on the complexity of the case and whether the applicant can provide the information required. The honourable member just mentioned a reminder from Hong Kong MA. Hong Kong MA has reminded the banking sector that in exercising the due diligence test, measures should be safe and sound, while trying to combat ML and TF. We will not jeopardize the ability of SMEs and startups to have access to banking services. So Hong Kong MA has sent notices to banks asking them to adopt a risk-based approach, and depending on the background and the circumstances of the accounts and also the risk for ML and TF, know your customer due diligence test should be adopted on a risk-based approach, on a risk basis, and
so the procedures can be improved. It's worthwhile mentioning that all retail banks have provide a pre-examination approach. So by means of email or faxes or by post, prospective customers can send the relevant information to banks for pre-screening. Before an interview is arranged between the prospective customer and the bank. This will facilitate new users, and banks have set up hotlines and dedicated branches so that there are specially trained frontline staff to assist new customers, to help SMEs and startups to open new accounts. We would like to receive information from the business sector, from members of the public, and overseas prospective customers. So the Hong Kong May has on its website got a dedicated page to facilitate customers to reflect their views to the Hong Kong MA. That is account.hkma.hg. So we want to help enterprises to open bank accounts as fast as possible. Mr. Kenneth Leung, in the first paragraph of the Secretary's reply, it is said that from 2013 to 2017, 828 persons were prosecuted and 620 persons were convicted. On these two figures, can the Secretary tell us, among these cases, how many of them were related to resolutions of the UN? Secretary. Mr. Kenneth Leung asked for a breakdown of the cases. I'm afraid we don't have such information regarding implementation of resolution for UN sanctions. Can that be supplied after the meeting? Yes, we'll follow up afterwards. Mr. Ronald Chen, President, the Secretary, and Mr. Jimmy Ng refer to the first risk assessment report published in April 2018. And on a sector-by-sector basis, the banking sector face a high risk involving ML and TF activities. I'm of the view that banking staff should not be criminal liability. And according to statistics, there were 16 convicted cases for operation money service operators. And since the implementation of the UN ATM, I'd like to know whether banking staff was convicted, prosecuted for the related offences in that ordinance. Secretary. President, we've tried to ascertain the prosecution and conviction figures and to ask for a breakdown. However, LEAs have not maintained statistics on industry basis. So we'll try to understand and see whether such information will be available.
Government motion. Proposed resolution under the Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Ordinance. Members